Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 2, Episode 2. The stories in this episode are What Are Friends For and Aqua Vita. So spoilers for the episode as always. This is a Patreon-sponsored review. Thank you very much to Cindy for making the pick. So, yeah, this... Sadly, I think this is another mixed episode for me. Both stories, I think, are okay, but neither one are really that great. And I think part of it is that I found both of them like extremely predictable in a very unsatisfying way. Now, being predictable isn't inherently bad. Like, sometimes things are predictable because they've set up things properly and it's satisfying to see it come to its natural conclusion. I think these two were kind of a little uninspired. Like, they're just kind of playing out almost like by the numbers, as you'd expect. There's maybe a little bit of ambiguity to kind of theorize or attach meaning to, but for the most part, they don't really do anything particularly exciting or that special. So there's some interesting guest stars, at the very least, as we're often finding with these 80s Twilight Zone episodes. The first one, What Are Friends For, has got Tom Skerritt, who most people will probably recognize from Alien. But he's here, he plays a father, and his young son is played by Fred Savage, who people will know from things. What, was he in the Wonder Years? Was that his thing? Wait, hold on. I need to double check what Fred Savage was actually famous for, because I know him. It was Wonder Years. Okay, I'm not going nuts. That's excellent. Also Princess Bride, which I guess people probably also care about. But yes, he's here. He plays his son. And he is living in like a cabin or a house in the woods, so he's very far away from civilization, and the son is living with him instead of the mother, seemingly after some more marital disputes. And the whole episode revolves around the idea that there's no one for him to play with, there's no other kids around for him to be friends with, and all of a sudden someone named Mike shows up and starts hanging around with him. But the father also mentions that when he was his son's age, he even had an imaginary friend. And then, of course, the main plot is about the kid getting an imaginary friend who's clearly imaginary and even supernatural, actually. I mean, maybe imaginary is not the right word, but he's not a human being because he can literally make horses appear and outfits appear. So when they're playing cowboys, quote unquote, they're literally on horses with outfits and whatever else. Now, they don't do a lot of that stuff because I imagine it would keep inflating the budget to always be able to show whatever they're pretending to be. But you get a little bit of it just to get the idea. I think early on it was pretty obvious to me that this Mike character, this imaginary friend, just for lack of a better term, this spirit, this phantom, whatever he is probably the same one that the dad had as a kid, right? Because he talks about it being out here, he stayed here with his great-grandfather, and he had this experience, and they start playing with this idea that he keeps sort of seeing the kid off in the distance, but then he's not there, and it's kind of linked to him as well. And the episode largely kind of revolves around the idea that the son, Jeff, he gets really like into hanging around with Mike and doesn't like being around other kids. So when his dad takes him to his like colleagues like barbecue or whatever, and like they've got like 3 kids, he starts getting into trouble with them. He starts fighting with them and saying things or getting into tussles, which is kind of awkward. There's a little bit of like social embarrassment sort of you feel on behalf of the dad that his son's been such a little shit. Even though he's not necessarily being like vicious or anything, he just clearly has a bit of an attitude problem and would rather be with Mike. And that's kind of like what the episode gets around. And the dad keeps not being able to see him, says, hey, invite him over for dinner or something. There's a couple of events that take place. One is that Mike has Jeff go into this sort of like den that's been built in the woods, like a little clubhouse, and it collapses on top of him, and the dad has to come and find him, and he's able to pull him out. He ends up being okay, but there's a little bit of a scare that he can't find him for a minute, and then when he finds him, he's like, hey, if this makes the one leading you into dangerous situations, you shouldn't be hanging around with him anymore. And Jeff doesn't want to hear that. From there, though, the big thing is that eventually the dad does actually interact with Mike. But notably, Mike looks different. He looks a bit more old school. He looks like a kid from 50 years ago or 40 years ago, relative to the 80s. And it takes a minute for Tom Skerritt's character kind of to acknowledge that this is the same imaginary kid that he spoke to when he was younger. You know, at first he can't quite believe it, but then the kid keeps saying things and showing him this yo-yo that he gave him, and it's like, oh shit, you really are this person. And the big dilemma of the episode, of the story, is really that he says, I don't think you should hang around with my son. You should leave him alone. And he makes this request because it's maybe not healthy for his son, that his son should be playing with the other kids and building healthier relationships, whereas every time he interacts with these other real kids, he keeps getting into disputes. They're making fun of him for suggesting weird things. And the spirit seemingly does what he asks, where he basically tells the son Jeff the next time he sees him that he's not going to hang around with him anymore. And this upsets Jeff. Jeff gets really upset. He runs into his father's arms saying, he liked playing with me before, why doesn't he want to be around with me anymore? And the dad just kind of hugs him and, you know, consoles him. And it's an interesting premise to a point, and I think maybe some of the things they're trying to get at here, beyond just this idea of like history repeating itself and whatever, and that's forgetting the fact that there's a real magical being that's appearing as these imaginary friends. But this idea of the father re-examining his own youth and maybe thinking, oh, maybe it wasn't healthy. Like, you know, the episode starts off with him saying, you'll be okay out here. You can have an imaginary friend because I had that and I turned out great. But then in the process of actually being a father to a kid with an imaginary friend and seeing the social issues that that's causing, he changes his mind. He changes his tune and realizes that maybe just because he went through something, it's not necessarily what's actually best for a kid to go through, and maybe his son should go through a healthier line of thinking kind of thing. And that's all right, you know, and this idea as well that it's literally the same thing, and maybe the idea that a parent doesn't open up about some of their hidden truths to a child, but he's realizing the same things kind of come for his son that came for him. And not that it's like scary or anything, not that it means him any harm. All indications point to this thing being fairly benevolent and just wanting to play with kids. I mean, that sounds bad when you say it like that, but you know what I mean. It sounds like he does just want to like entertain the kids that are out here, but ultimately agrees to leave. And then after Jeff has his breakup, quote unquote, with imaginary Mike talks to the father again, to Tom Skerritt, and Tom Skerritt kind of thanks him or whatever, and he basically flies off like a spirit. Doesn't really give a proper answer to what he is, and just kind of goes off. And we see the next time that Jeff's with the other real kids, he's doing okay. He's playing with them. They're having a good time. It seems like he's over whatever he was going through. And when the other guy's like, "Hey, the barbecue's ready," Tom Skerritt's like, "No, give them a minute. Let them play. Let them be kids for a bit." It's a very sentimental episode, and I often find that I don't tend to love the overly sentimental episodes of Twilight Zone. There's definitely exceptions, don't get me wrong. I'm sure if I go back to the original series, you'll find a couple of sentimental ones that I really like. But I think by and large, this is kind of teetering into some of the territory that we've had before. It's not a million miles away of you know, a character walking into their past. It's just here it's their kid who's sort of experiencing some of their past instead of them, and then them realizing, which don't get me wrong, is a good enough different spin on it. But definitely thematically, it feels like it's touching on some of the same areas. Plus the idea of just some sort of imaginary spirit or entity being there as a guide of some kind is hardly new for Twilight Zone either. So it's not like it's hitting any new notes, I don't think, for me overall as a Twilight Zone story. I like Tom Skerritt well enough, obviously, and Fred Savage is fine, I guess. I don't really have any attachment to him. I never really liked the Wonder Years from the few episodes that I saw, and I have seen Princess Bride, but it's fine. Like, I don't know, it didn't blow me away, shall we say. And I think he's only in like the bookend segments, if I remember correct, anyway. But yeah, I just don't feel that strongly about this, I think, all things considered. Perhaps the most interesting thing is the dad asking the spirit to leave his son alone, and then the spirit being, yeah, okay, I'll have a fight with him. I'll intentionally fight with him and break up with him so that he knows it's over, and I'll have, you know, adhered to your wishes, kind of thing. And you can read this episode, I think, as the father dealing with his own past and kind of finally letting a demon go so that he can just be the father his son needs, or something like that. And it's all fine, but none of it's really hitting with me all that hard. So very lukewarm on the first story of this episode, which is What Are Friends For? Now, the second story, Aqua Vita, which, and the Vita means life. I know that because of the PlayStation Vita, of all things. But Vita means life, Aqua, of course, means water, or is water related at the very least. So, water life, that's what this title translates to. And sure enough, it is about water that you can buy as a subscription to look younger. The episode revolves around a woman who's just turning 40 years old. It's her 40th birthday in the episode, and she's a news anchor. She's on TV, and she says she hates her birthday. She makes a couple of digs about how she's feeling old, and you're going to start thinking I'm unattractive to her husband, and she jokes that he's the younger man, which it doesn't seem to be younger. I mean, maybe he technically is by a little bit, like maybe he's 39 or 38, but he's not, it's not an age gap of a relationship. He looks in the ballpark of what she does, but she's getting self-conscious, and it's like, okay, so we're going to, that's the main theme of the episode. I think what was weird for me about this episode is that it's a drug addiction episode, right? It's right down to the fact that Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore is the guy who comes and installs this water tank in your house, and it's got a key to unlock it because people might steal your fancy life water, and drinking it makes you look younger. And it's something that her colleague at work kind of recommended when she revealed that she was like 49, because the main character's like, oh, you'll understand one day when you hit 40, and she's like, I hit that years ago. And she shows her driving license, and I think it was like 1939 was her year of birth, meaning she's bordering on 50, I think, yeah, just a couple of years shy. So it's like, okay, all right, that set up her premise, and Shooter McGavin comes in, and the moment he says, the first one is free, and does like a creepy smile or whatever, there's also another moment where someone asks, like, what he is or who he is, and he gets like this really creepy, serious look in his face and says, don't ask. And I thought that was a bit hokey. Like, I kind of enjoyed it, but it was very hokey. And I think the thing about this episode is just how straight it plays its subtext, where it's barely even subtext anymore. Like, it's one thing to do an addiction story and say this is an allegory for addiction and for drugs and whatever, but it's not really that much of an allegory when it is literally just, she got her first taste for free, and the downside, the catch-22 of this liquid that does make her look younger, is that if she goes too long without it, she looks way older than she's supposed to, and that makes her like really, self-conscious and paranoid. We're getting into the substance style territory of her like worrying about her looks and like needing to get back to her water so she can drink it. And then the episode teases that this stuff costs a lot once you're hooked on it, because the colleague asks to borrow thousands of dollars so that she can, well, she doesn't actually say that it's for the water, but there's an implication. And sure enough, the very next scene is when Shooter McGavin's back delivering the water, and he's like, hey, that'll be $5,000, please. She's like, that's an outrage. What the hell? That is an absurd amount of money. And I think this, like, the metaphor is so thin because it's almost just literally what it is. It just happens to be magical water instead of whatever, substitute your narcotic of choice. I think what gets me about it is just these weird little things that took me out of the story. Like right here, her shock of the price when she goes to pay for her second amount of it, because the first amount was free, second amount you have to pay. In what world would she not ask what the price of this is before she agrees to have it installed? It makes no sense. And if he refused to tell you, she just wouldn't take it. Would anyone take it? Like, despite the promise of it being, what it is, right? This idea that it'll make you look younger, you'll believe it, blah, 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 blah. I can't imagine a world in which you do not at least get a ballpark figure for what it's going to cost before you start taking it or before you agree to start using it. I don't know. It struck me as so weird for her to be so shocked. Like, why did you not even ask the price? And if he didn't tell you, if he refused to tell you when he asked on the, or when you asked on the first visit, then you would know something fishy was up. I don't know. It all felt a bit weird to me. I guess they're going for the whole idea she's clouded by her desire for what the effect is. She's clouded by her desire to look young and feel young, blah 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 blah. And I get that, but it still just feels really weird for it not to have even come up. I don't know. It's weird for her not to know what the price is going to be before she's agreed for her second shipment. But anyway, so she's sort of addicted to it now. She's taking it and trying to not look old. But when she's away for it for too long, it seems like it's getting shorter and shorter as well before she needs her next fix. Again, feels just very, very too close to actual addiction to feel like it's even a metaphor at that point. And when the husband starts to notice her acting erratically and thinking this is weird, when she calls off the little weekend getaway to go back home so she can drink this water, he actually goes to the colleague to try and ask her what's going on with his wife. And she won't answer the door, but he sees Shooter McGavin delivering her water. And when she opens the door, she looks all old. And when I say she looks old, she's got, makeup and, grey hair, a grey wig on or whatever. But he looks all shocked, and Shooter McGavin looks all, creepy or whatever. And he comes home and he sees his wife looking really old. And he's like, hey, why didn't you tell me about this? Blah, 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 blah. And they go for this sweet ending where she's like, hey, like, we can't stay together. Like, I'm going to be stuck like this now if I can't keep paying for it. And, like, we can't be together for the rest of our lives. Like, what's it going to be like when someone mistakes me for your mother and all that? And sort of paints a picture out. And he just walks over to the water and pours some. And the implication being that he's going to do it to himself so they're on equal footing. And he will also look old. And the episode ends with them sitting on a park bench, both looking old, and again, in slightly dodgy old age makeup, and just cracking jokes about how they look old, but how they're dedicated to each other, blah, 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 blah. And it's meant to be kind of a sweet ending. Now, obviously, the other thing this is touching on here is obviously the pressure to look young, particularly for a woman, especially one who's in the entertainment industry of some kind, on camera, and this idea of how much pressure that is. Yes, obviously it's a good theme. But it feels like it pivots quite hard into just straight addiction, especially the way she's having to hide it for her husband, and she's paying obscene amounts of money for it, and so on and so on. And yeah, maybe there's like a nice element here of like, no, like the husband stands by her, but I think it's also kind of mixing its metaphor a little bit with this idea of like wanting to grow old with her. Like, she's worried that she's growing older quicker than he is before she even touches this water. Back in the birthday scene, she's making jokes about that. And this is him saying, no, I'm going to be old with you. And he literally becomes old with her, as quickly as she has. He sacrifices his youngish appearance to match hers to make her feel better, which is a sweet enough sacrifice, don't get me wrong. It's sending all the kind of the right message. But it doesn't really vibe with the addiction storyline all that much, right? Like, if we're reading this purely from the addiction point of view, then him just getting hooked on the same thing, or maybe not hooked, but him getting on the same thing so he has the same withdrawal symptoms as her is kind of a weird move that doesn't quite work. So I don't know, like, it felt like very surface level in a lot of the things that it was doing, whether it be the addiction, the fear of growing old, and then kind of the age gap relationship stuff. Like, all of it is a fine idea, but it all felt surface level, and some of them felt like they were kind of button heads a little bit by the end for me, where I don't think it didn't feel like a good conclusion to an addiction storyline. It felt like the conclusion to a couple who have been having issues where one's feeling self-conscious about their age and the other one kind of doing what he can to try and even the playing field so she feels like it's an equal thing in the relationship. If that's all it was the whole time, I think that would be completely fine. But it leans so hard into the addiction stuff for most of it that it felt like, yeah, but but that's not really a solution to the addiction part. I don't know, it felt a little bit strange to me, and left me kind of feeling weird at the end. I think I like the ideas of this story more than the first one, though. I think Aqua Vita has generally more interesting ideas, and I think Shooter McGavin's like mysterious, delivery man of the fancy life water, like, entertaining, Definitely had a bit more atmosphere, I think, than the first story did. The first one was going for more that whimsical sentiment of like, oh, my childhood, think about it. This one had a little bit more of a kind of a mysterious, anxious kind of vibe, and that made it, I think, a little bit more entertaining than the first one. But still not a winner for me, all things considered. So, yeah, very, very mixed bag of a pair of stories for me on this episode. But hey, you know, they can't all be winners, and I suspect that we're due one any minute now, right? We must be. Also, I'm looking at the names in the cast list here, and I'm noticing Mark Paul Gosselaar, who I think is the main Zach from Saved by the Bell. He must have been one of the kids in the first story. I did not see him before, but that is, or recognize him, I should say. But that's good. Also, the actor playing Mike looks familiar based on his IMDb photo. Again, he was a kid in this, so I wouldn't have recognized him. Lucas Haas, yeah, I definitely know his face. Yeah, he was in Inception. He was in Witness, which would have been a couple of years before this. Oh, that's interesting. That he was in Mars Attacks. Okay, I've definitely seen his face around. But again, obviously he's a kid in this, so I wouldn't have recognized him straight up. So, yeah, real mixed bag. I think there was potential in the second story. I think it just kind of, I don't know. And the funny thing is when I saw, sometimes I'll look up the episodes a little bit after I've watched them just to see what the general feelings are on them, to see if I'm meshing with them. And the few things I could see for this one is that people do quite like the second story, but I can't say that I'm feeling that enthusiastic about it. I think it was a pretty middling story for me of this show, all things considered. But hey, that is my thoughts on this pair of stories in the 80s Twilight Zone. I should be back next month with the next episode. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Of course, you can like, subscribe, helps out a bunch if you do with that dreaded YouTube algorithm. And of course, you can support all the shows and reviews both here and over at MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. You can support both channels by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there and getting some bonuses, or via YouTube membership if that's easier for whatever reason. All valuable options which help. So thanks to everyone who already does support us. That is me, though. Thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.